Yeah, so this panel is on the paper that Xiaohong published with co-author Isaac Reed, who is with us today, in sociological theory last year. The paper is Modernity and the Politics of Newness, Unravelling New Time in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1968. So the way that this panel will unfold will be just a little slightly different than the previous ones because of having the co-author here with us. So I will just introduce the panelists and then turn it over to Isaac to talk about the argument, and then we'll turn it over to the other two panelists, and then Isaac will come back around and sort of change roles in relationship to the paper, and then we'll have a discussion. And the program indicates that Genevieve Zabricki was going to be on here, but she is ill today, and so this is our complete panel. So that's the plan. So to the introduction of the speakers, Isaac Reed is the Thomas C. Sorensen Professor of Political and Social Thought and Professor of Sociology at the University of Virginia. He's a historical and cultural sociologist with particular interest in the philosophy of social science, the historical origins of American modernity, and the development of the American state and the social theory of power. So he has published a book with the University of Chicago Press, Interpretation and Social Knowledge on the Use of Theory in the Human Sciences. He's published a bunch of other things and has been the recipient of the Junior Theorist Award from the ASA section on theory, and also the Louis Kozer Award for theoretical agenda setting in sociology. And Yang Su is professor in the Department of Sociology at UC Irvine, and he studies political violence, revolution, and social movements. He is author of Collective Killings in Rural China During the Cultural Revolution, published by Cambridge in 2011, and Deadly Decision in Beijing, Succession Politics, Protest, Repression, and the 1989 Tiananmen Massacre, also at Cambridge. So he also writes on labor protest in contemporary China and works as both an ethnographer and a statistician. So Robert Jansen, my colleague here at University of Michigan, is a comparative historical sociologist studying politics, culture, and collective memory. His first book examined the historical emergence of populist mobilization in the early 20th century Peru, and he's working on a project on historic preservationism in the United States. And this paper is very much in conversation, as we will hear, with his paper published on Theory and Society on pragmatism, pragmatist theories of action. His paper, Situated Political Innovation, Explaining the Historical Emergence of New Modes of Political Practice in 2016, is one of the sort of theoretical sort of touchstones of this piece of work. So I guess without further ado, I will turn it over to Isaac, and we'll get started.
Thanks so much. Thanks for that introduction, Elizabeth, and to everyone who's been working to set up this conference. I really can't thank you enough. It's really been made it even sort of possible for me to try to write these words. So I really owe a great deal of debt. So this paper that we're talking about here began when I visited Xiaohong at the National University of Singapore for sort of 10 days, really a week. And that was in 2017 when he worked at NUS and I was working on my book, which was far in the future to being finished. And we then worked on the paper together for 6 years before it was published. It went through many iterations and endured many cuts. It was supposed to be a trial balloon for a larger set of explorations of political modernity, and also for a set of explorations of the history of intellectuals trying to write about modernity. An esteemed group which we arrogated ourselves into when trying to work on the paper. And I'm going to talk about those further directions in my later comments. And what I want to do now is just introduce the paper to this group by arguing that it really has sort of three interlocking components that I want to tell you about very briefly. The first is the triadic distinction in the sociology of temporal experience that we make between ordinary time, carnival time, and new time. We try to depart from Durkheim and other dualist understandings of the sort of social structuring of the experience of time, going away from Durkheim's division of mundane activity from times of collective effervescence and various 20th century sociology sort of iterations of that idea, between social stability and social change, or settled and unsettled times. We tried to say that there were really two kinds of unordinary or unroutine time, one of which we call carnival time, after Bakhtin and the idea of carnival that then returns to normality, and the other which we called new time and tried to explore. Although the idea and experience that human beings might have of finding themselves in an entirely new time, unprecedented in human history, has probably always been available to individuals and groups. Our paper suggests that there are a variety of ways in which modernity or political modernity can be thought of as thematizing the possibility of a brand new time, maybe bringing it to the foreground or expressing its possibility. In particular, this connected us to the comparative historical sociology of revolutions and the emphasis in some parts of that sociology on trying to think about the experience of revolution and how thinking about the experience of revolution could influence our theories of what even brought a revolution about and also where it went. And one of the things that we try to develop with this first distinction is to kind of what to us seemed like a very interesting question, which is that in a time of disruption or radical uncertainty that might have many different causes, when a lot of people feel that something non-ordinary is happening, interpretive disputes might emerge about how one might tell the difference between a kind of carnival which might involve some inversions but then sort of revert back to a previously existing social order or political order, and a new time. And we thought that this was an underappreciated part of scholarship on revolutions that we dearly loved, and I should really mention here Charlie Kurtzman's book on the Iranian Revolution, The Unthinkable Revolution in Iran, as a kind of deep inspiration for this paper. So that was our kind of concern with new time. The second component of the paper is a careful reading of three moments or passages in the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The first 50 days, approximately June and July 1966. The January storm in Shanghai, which we heard so much about in the first panel. And then the Wuhan incident and the reaction to it that effectively restored something like a party-centered political order, and in which Mao used the army to suppress the students that he had himself earlier encouraged. These three passages were subject to a very fine-grained reading based on Xiaohong's sources. And his narratives for this part of the paper, constructed and reconstructed over many, many rewrites, focused more and more on the kind of contingencies of oppositional politics and uncertainty. In fact, sort of contingencies in the very idea of what opposition even means. One way to read this part of the paper might be to emphasize two parts of it, although I would just encourage everyone to read this part in particular. So one is that you know, we were very interested in kind of trying to get into the kind of interstitial sort of teeth of actual push and pull in the CCR, and we tended to avoid the use of the term factionalism as a kind of generalized master term to do a kind of explanatory work, and rather instead wanted to kind of stand a kind of emergent experience of the CCR. The second one was very important to discussions today. We also go over the crucial moment where the workers' demands in Shanghai are rejected as economism, and we tried to relate that to the politics of this being a brand new time, completely unprecedented in history, and I'll come back to that. So the third dimension here was of the paper is the analysis of the performative dimension of power politics and the development of a model for relating performative power to struggle and revolution and questions about culture and states. And here we were interested in developing, and I think I want to kind of emphasize this, we were interested in developing a model of performance in politics that was different than the related to what we had found in Jeff Alexander's work and Ari Adut's accounts of public performance. In our argument about the CCR, we actually argue that what's required is a kind of understanding that one thing that felicitous performances can do in certain political situations is to create political energy and generate political alignment and push decisions one way or another by resolving for a variable amount of time what had been ambiguities, ambivalences, and difficulties of interpretation. So this is important because generally when people talk about culture and performance, they sort of imagine that there is a culture or a set of background representations, and then the person who kind of wins the performance is the one who best represents, I don't know, the culture, right? And that's not our model here, right? Our model is actually that is one of not only opposition, but confusion, misunderstanding, and deep ambiguity, and that the reason sort of that performances move politics is because they at least for a moment resolve that ambiguity and kind of line people up in a certain way around the performance. And our analysis of each of the moments in the CCR is the basis for developing this model, which does not assume a kind of coherent background culture, but rather the thing that is being dealt with by the performance is the fact that everyone is engaged in power struggle, quite possibly opposed to people close to them, and deeply confused about the next thing that's going to happen in the revolution. And what we want to say is that sometimes effective public performances are effective precisely because they remove ambiguities, at least for a little while. So this leads to our central aspect of our empirical findings, and then I'll be done. So what we found is that, so we found sort of two things in this study. So one is that during the sort of volatile course of the CCR, performances would be effective and kind of give political direction, and then contradictions and struggles would reemerge. The other big thing that we were really interested in and it kept coming through was that the struggles themselves were inflected by this argument about what kind of time people were in. And that sounds a little bit abstract, so let me just like sort of give as a sort of example something I'll talk about later, which is sort of, for example, generational struggle in the CCR about whether the young generation would get to have their own brand new and entirely unprecedented revolution, or would be tasked only with building a previously existing socialism and following the founding revolution. So what we kept sort of finding, and this was really Xiaohong's amazing finding in this paper, and the writing only emerged just because me asking him, as a scholar of the Atlantic and not of the Pacific, asking him a bunch of annoying questions, is this aspect, which is that there was some aspect of revolutionary politics which was actually an argument about the interpretation about what time it was. Like, is this a necessary kind of carnivalistic purge of certain members of the party who have to be thrown out, or is this in fact an entirely new, brand new time that throws out all previous schemas of interpretation and renders everything behind it as kind of a broken from past? So with that, I think I'll stop now. I'll see you guys again later. But thank you so much for listening so far.
Thank you, Isaac, for summarizing the full paper. And I shall confine myself to give a read of the history of cultural revolution without touching upon the cultural theories. In the true spirit to the love of debate of Xiaohong, I will offer an alternative read of what really happened about the revolution during the Cultural Revolution at the end. But let me start by joining previous speakers to thank the wonderful organizing work put into to have this wonderful conference. This is toward the end of the conference, and I bet you will agree with me. We have had a tremendous conference, and Xiaohong deserves it. By now, you may have heard one thing about Xiaohong is the range of interest, range of publication. It is a testimonial of his range that I find myself commenting on a second Xu Xiaohong. Earlier in February, in an earlier memorial activity, I gave a speech in Chinese, a comment on a first Xu Xiaohong. By that I mean the first one is what I called a positivist Xu Xiaohong. And he is an empirical researcher, but he also dazzling in interpretations. What I call the second Xu Xiaohong, a post-positivist Xu Xiaohong. He published on Chinese Revolution before 49. You have heard about it. And it takes deep understanding of the history and sociology and events to write about it. You heard about it today. In the meantime, he also wrote about the Cultural Revolution, also very complex. And after reading this paper, I have to admit, although I say I'm going to offer some alternative interpretation, and his compendium of materials, history, and events is masterful. And I really admire that. Let me show a little bit slide. How does this work? Okay. Before I proceed, though, I am a positivist. So if you discern my liking is more toward these kind of articles, there should not be surprise. So like I said, I'm going to confine myself to Cultural Revolution as a history. And what exactly this paper has talked about Cultural Revolution. And the paper has 3 messages. 1, there was a new time. I'll explain what they means, about new time in a minute. And second, this new time was a failure. The performative enactment just appeared for a time, but ended quickly. Lastly, this new time was discredited. Besides the conceptual and theoretical discussion, the paper presents these theories, these three messages about Cultural Revolution. Oh, there must be, there's a line and some marker, but the machine did not show. So basically, Cultural Revolution in the early years were divided by 2 key moments written by the paper, as I already mentioned. One is January 1967. That was related to a large wave of events in Shanghai, historically known as a power seizure. But don't be fooled by the name of power seizure. The whole act was instigated by Mao himself, and 2 high major lieutenants, Zhang Chunqiao and Yao Wenyuan, were sent to Shanghai, and then to endorse power seizure, and the message supposedly to occupy the editorial office of a major newspaper, and then Shanghai's municipal government, and then Mao then have a subsequent endorsement. That's a big moment. And from that moment, the articulation of a new time entered the emergence of a new time, in which rebellion is justified, smashing everything, and mass organizations were allowed under communism. Think about that. And this mass organization quickly split into 2 factions. They fighting street battles, big ones with some casualties as well. Then there's a second moment I wrote here, was July 1967 in Wuhan. 2 camps of mass organizations mainly participated not only in Red Guards anymore and proletarian working classes. They were fighting each other to the degree when the Cultural Revolution small group leadership representing Mao to Shanghai to intervene were attacked by very radical mass organizations. That point on, Mao issued another order and the new time faded into factional violence. So what is exactly new time? And my reading, Isaac can correct me, is revolution. Not only revolution, in their language, is Jacobinian version. What does that mean? The paper is not exactly very clear in terms of what the revolution program is, what kind of new society is being built, or what's the criteria to find those people to prevent this happening, that we call it counter-revolutionaries. And not very clear about who are the revolutionaries. Although these 3 elements are not exactly clear, but we can discern from the paper. Somewhere the paper called the Jacobean Revolution. It's about popular sovereignty, reordering of the society. Very apt, new time. In other quotations, more vividly, Lenin was involved. Lenin's term is festivals of the oppressed, you expect it, and the exploited. And I'll read a quotation from the paper, and I'm showing you the other one. People's Daily editorial on June 8, 1966, vowed to turn Chinese people into 700 million critics of the old world, the old ideology, and the culture, and all the customs and habits. The Jacobean aspiration for radical newness was loud and clear. But as I mentioned, the paper is hesitating to spell out these elements when we define a revolution. And so I say I know, but I should say maybe unclear, or it's a point I may debate with. Program, what's the new society looks like? Remember Mao was the leader behind these regards and the masses. And though these regards rushing to do the revolution, what are they changing it to? Well, they set up exactly the same thing before they smash anything. Who are the targets? In French Revolution and other revolutions, you may think the defenders of the old system. Well, there's almost no defenders of old system as they behave. All those bureaucrats become their hard time came. They try to discern what kind of right thing to follow Mao to avoid the fate of being removed. It's very difficult to charge them to defend the system. They are trying to discern the political wind. Therefore, these targets have no clear, discernible criteria to find who to smash, who to protect. And then who is the revolutionaries? Later on, we say this perception of a new time is not supposed to be understood as possessed by all the members of, or majority of the society. It's a fraction of the masses and fraction of the elite may have this kind of understanding. And then now, let me get some water. Quickly you may say, I know Cultural Revolution. I heard bureaucrats was being challenged. And can you not say that's a revolution right there? I think that's yes. And we'll lend evidence to this perception of revolution. Thank you. But no, in another sense. I can come up with 3 Cultural Revolution scenarios to you to illustrate this fluid nature of defining the target. First one, Red Guards initially wanted to change the traffic light. The establishment is what? Green, pass, right? Red, stop. That's establishment. Remember the earlier quote? Smash everything. That becomes a target. Red Guards want to change this. And then, okay, red is more proper, more correct than red to pass, and the green stop. But a few months later, this become new establishment. You get what I'm trying to get? That's still in Cultural Revolution time. Why is the public mandate to change this? Why is public interest being served? That's first scenario. Second, let's say you have a mayor green, a mayor red in a county. A mayor green says, let's focus on production. Mayor red said, let's focus on political campaign. And then when red girl wants to protect one over the other, what kind of public interest is being served? What kind of public mandate is? I can go on. I also mentioned Wuhan. The rebellion is such that even Mao could not take it, tolerate anymore. So what I'm trying to say is the target is very fluid. So it's not the neat image of a revolution. Oh. And also there's this question about why the new time was ended. New time was ended, although as I said, avoid fashionalism. And new time indeed, accounting your able narrative, ended in factional conflict. Factional here is meaning one group after another. It doesn't mean factional fault lines can be discerned. I hope I'm making sense. It's a chaotic situation. Fault line can change rapidly. But suffice to say, initial perception of a revolution, even for Mao, has to be ended because it descends to factionalism. So my comments, like I said, for those people who understand my Cultural Revolution work, you will not be surprised I'm presenting this as an alternative reading of what Cultural Revolution is, different from the reading about revolution. So my first contention is not a revolution. The perception of revolution, first of all, is party state propaganda. Revolution is a good word. What's the catchword nowadays here in politics? But China Revolution definitely a sacred word. All the publications will deem everything revolution, whatever you do. If issue from Mao, party center, that's revolution. And relatedly, some people hit this chord. I'm not sure they are deliberately wanted to destroy things, destruct things. They may have this illusion of new time. Therefore, unlike many other, it's difficult to talk about public mandate as a revolution may imply. And those victims, those people who are hesitating what not to do, they may not perceive the same so-called new era or new time. So to repeat what my explanation about factionalism, I mean, why new time was ended and descended to chaos in Cultural Revolution. First of all, it's not so much a revolution. Every step away, fighting the hidden enemies in the ranks, first in the ranks of so-called power holders, later even in the rank among the masses. Constantly so. This, if we use the Western terminology, I would say this is right-wing movement. You have powerful persecution, that's the opposite of revolution. Therefore, no wonder the target standard has been redefined all the time. Imagine if you have real revolution, you have real public support, then you may have a new time with some stability. But if you have to redefine everything every day, therefore, your new time may not sustain. Here I quote, I'm not alone in this interpretation. I quote someone, you can guess it, Zhang Yang. Andy Waters' quotation. He said, if the Cultural Revolution was really an idealistic quest for equality and democracy, or a dispute over national policy, why did it take the form of a search for hidden traitors and enemies? If Cultural Revolution radicalism was a radical mask of rational interest group activity, why did these rational actors appear to take their rhetoric so seriously and routinely kidnap, humiliate, and fight wars of annihilation against other radical workers and students? So earlier I mentioned there are two Xiaohongs. So don't get me wrong, I still admire Xiaohong's command of the history and the range, and not to mention those cultural theories I studied for so long, still don't dare to repeat what I learned to you. And the recounting of the performance of enactment is very interesting to read, although I complain his explanation of why this new time could not continue, the paper did not include. I try to offer a different kind of explanation for it. And don't take me as a critic of Xiaohong as a whole. I really like his body of work as a whole. And I particularly like the two articles from which I define him in a dirty word called a positivist. Those two articles, the ASR article and the Theory and Society article. And this morning we enjoyed one of them. I was the one who almost wanted to campaign to include the ASR article as well. But I listened. I did not want to create organizational headache, so I did not insist. Okay, those are my remarks. Thank you.
Okay, so it's great to see everybody here at the end of a long and really, I think, really stimulating day of talking about Xiaohong, the legacy of Xiaohong's work. I want to start by thanking Roy and the other organizers for all the work behind this, and for inviting me to speak on this panel to reflect on Xiaohong's work, and in this case his article with Isaac, who I'm also really glad could be here with us today. It's particularly meaningful to me to engage with this specific article because it gives me a chance to continue an ongoing conversation that Xiaohong and I had been having about time and temporality in recent years, and hopefully also a chance to carry that conversation forward into the future with the help of all of you, his graduate students, other graduate students here, out there, around the world, and the rest of us gathered here today. All of this is, of course, bittersweet because I wish that more than anything I was reading this work, having this conversation with Xiaohong and Isaac over coffee at the next ASA. but I'll really do my best here to try to capture the flavor of what I might have said to both of them under those better circumstances. So the charge that I gave myself here today was twofold. First, as I just suggested, to continue my ongoing conversation with Xiaohong in the sense of just kind of taking the next turn in the dialogue. And as not being a China specialist myself, my next turn in the dialogue wouldn't necessarily have to do with China. So we hadn't planned this division of labor, but I'm really focusing on the kind of more abstract theoretical stuff. So this is terrific. The second, I want to highlight and draw out some key themes and avenues for future work that I think might encourage others to pick up Xiaohong's mantle and run with it. So I want to suggest that there are three ways do this by suggesting that there are three ways I think we can further open up the implications of this article's argument. And I think that they really derive from the, since I'm not really engaging with the case here, from the first and third points that Isaac was talking about, the theoretical points about the nature of time and revolutionary moments and modernity, and about the nature of performance in those political moments. So the first point I want to reflect on is possibilities for going beyond thinking about the contentious temporality of the present. Second, ways of thinking about transcending this dualistic conception, or possibly even the triadic conception of time that they offer. And third, disentangling temporal experience from performance on this performance point. Now, these points I don't think should be read as critiques of the article per se, for various reasons. First, as I just mentioned, I'm very far from a China expert myself. Second, I'm not engaging here with the explanatory argument per se. So I'm not suggesting that any of the points I make here would actually undercut that argument. I'm thinking much more about kind of generating next steps of research, of a research program into revolutions and modernity and time, especially the temporal nature of this. And then third, I think that the seeds of many, if not all of the points that I'm going to raise here, I think are already in the article. I think this is a very rich, theoretically sophisticated article. And so in a way, all of these points, I think, all of these points that may come off as critiques in a sense are already embedded in the article itself. And it's a question of points of emphasis that I would have liked to see pull out more. Without further ado, let me go to the first point, which is while in some articles, while in some senses this article is about temporality broadly construed, that's kind of where I would like to push this conversation, is to think more broadly about temporality and revolutions. And in some senses this article is about temporality broadly construed, but it really focuses on the contentious temporality of the present. Or to put it a little bit differently, it focuses on political struggles in the present over what kind of time we're living through, as we've just heard from the previous two speakers. I think the article could do more to consider how this interpretation of the present relates to conceptions of past and future, and to temporal continuities and discontinuities more generally. So that's going to be the first point that I'm going to try to elaborate here a little bit. So the article does a great job, I think, of demonstrating that the temporality of the present moment can become an object of interpretive contestation, especially in these moments of ambiguity that Isaac was talking about. Specifically, the article poses the question of how political actors frame moments as being expressions of revolutionary new time, how and when they might cast or recast these same episodes as carnival time, and what's at stake in this distinction. And in this way, the article, and I think especially in its empirical analysis, is more about the framing of the temporality of the present than it is about working through the full implications of the sociology of time and temporalities for the study of revolutions. Now, that's no fault of the article. That's a pretty tall order. I do want to introduce here, though, one minor point of criticism that I think follows from this focus on the temporality of the present. And this is that it can be too easy, I think, to slip from, if we're just focusing on the framing of the present moment, to slip from a focus on actors' various claims about time to a focus on their claims about one another, about their legitimate revolutionariness, and maybe in a more traditional ideological sense. And to be frank, this line became a bit fuzzy to me in the empirical analysis, where we're looking at specific data points. Now, don't get me wrong, the framing of actors and their actions, as revolutionary or not, matters too in these moments of factionalism. But this article, I think, is gesturing toward a lot more than just a traditional frame analysis of revolutionary claims making. And I think that the slippage I was feeling was partly an artifact of focusing on framings of the present without focusing enough on framings of the past and future and how these relate to framings of the present. That is, the framing of the present matters, but it's inseparable from the framing of the past and future. So it seems to me that the real question that for the historical actors here in the article is not so much about the character of the present moment as it is about the relationship of the past to the future and the meaning that the answer to this question confers on action in the present. Fortunately, there's a robust literature out there on collective memory, which I know that Xiaohong and Isaac are very familiar with, much of which does focus on revolutions and other forms of contentious politics. So there's plenty to draw on here. There's also an emerging literature out there drawing largely on phenomenological and pragmatist traditions on how visions and anticipations of the future shape understandings of action in the present, shape possibilities for action in the present. And I'd flag this for political sociologists in the room out there internationally, that I think there's still a lot of work to be done here with this, integrating the work on collective memory with the work on imagined futures in our work on contentious politics. So the article does, to be fair, engage with these literatures. I'm not suggesting that it's completely blind to them by any means, but I think that there's more work to be done to flesh this out. Now to go a little further, still on this first point, it strikes me that the crux of the matter of how actors interpret the present, and in particular whether they understand it as carnival time or new time, is really the question of historical continuity or discontinuity and claims making about historical continuity and discontinuity. And the article is clear about this. I mean, it's built into the definition of new time. So once again, I'm not saying that the article isn't making this point, but carnival time implies an inevitable return to the status quo ante, which is projected that status quo ante is projected to extend well into the future. So something like arrow number 1 up here on the slide. Whereas new time posits a radical discontinuity between the past and the present, a present that then itself is expected to extend forward in time. So maybe new time is something closer to arrow number 3 here. And there's a terrific example of this from the data on page 248 to kind of mark the moment of the failure of this new time, the failure of the performance of new time here. To quote from the article, Mao crossed out the phrase, quote, historically unprecedented, and remarked, never ever mention historically unprecedented again, saying effectively that's no longer, that kind of claim to new time is done. Now, I think that this focus on continuity and discontinuity of various sorts here shifts our focus from a narrower research agenda on the contestation of the character of the present to a broader one about how claims about the past and the future figure into claims about the present. So I want to pause here just for a second to flag a few suggestions for future research. And again, kind of my intention with these remarks is to direct this especially to kind of aspiring graduate students who want to pick up the mantle and think about what are the implications of this work. So the first point that I would make to people thinking about this is to continue pushing on the agenda laid out in this article here. I do think that there's a lot to be done in thinking about the contested temporalities of the present. The second point I would make is to work toward a more systematic integration of the scholarship on collective memory and imagined futures, as these, I think, are really integral to the politics of time in the present. And then third, to pay attention to how the framing of the present involves claims as much about the past, future, and continuities and discontinuities with these, as it does with the kind of just classifying the kind of time we're living through, new versus carnival. So that's my first point, and don't worry, the points get shorter so I'm watching the time. So this shifts. So the next point I want to make is about this dualistic time. So I want to telescope out a bit and consider why the article's ways of engaging with the temporality of revolution is so focused on characterizing historical periods. And it seems to me that it's because of the Durkheimian conception of time that it takes as its jumping off point. So this article begins by establishing the ubiquity of what the authors call dualistic conceptions of time in historical sociology. I won't go through it here. And they make important critiques of this conception that I largely agree with. They attempt to transcend this dichotomy by introducing a third category, that of revolutionary new time, which has already been talked about. So in a way, what they're positing is that the introduction of modernity makes this other type of unordinary time possible, and that's something that the dualistic conception of time hasn't been able to kind of adequately recognize. And it's what the authors call the ambiguity of unsettledness of the present moment that opens up the door for contentious performances. And this ambiguity is regarding whether the moment should be thought of as carnival time or new time. So, but I wonder whether thinking about modernity, time, and revolutions opens up more possibilities than that, more possibilities than just kind of adding a third category, adding another kind of unordinary time. So without getting into the weeds here too much and without reifying this traditional modern distinction, which I can already see the glint in Xiaohong's eyes to refer back to Mary Gallagher's point, I wonder if there's some conflation here, or if modernity opens up more possibilities for the contestation of temporalities than the article recognizes. I guess that's my point. Is there a difference in this balance between ordinary time and carnival time if we're thinking about kind of the full complexity of temporalities in modernity? So I'm not going to go through the details here. I think that there's a good amount of work in the sociology of time and temporality, and I'm not speaking really here. The article is about subjective experiences of time, not about kind of objective structures of time in some sense. And so this is really my point here, though, is that anticipations of or actors' renderings of what is the direction of time that we're moving through? What is the pace of change we're experiencing? Are there reversals to that time coming up? Is change happening linearly or exponentially? You can have all kinds of subjective contention over the nature of time and change processes once you're in a modern era in which time is understood as dynamic and kind of forward-moving in some sense. And so again, I'll pause here just to say, for the graduate students in the room, to continue to wrestle with this dualistic conception of time, I do think there are reasons why many have found it compelling, but I think that there's a lot to critique about it. But I would say really open up this idea of modern temporalities and how many ambiguities around temporalities can become the objects of contention in moments like this bottom right quadrant, where there are moments of uncertainty, there are moments of unsettled patterns and routines that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways in modernity. And then the third point I want to make, I'm not going to dwell on here, I think that is really that we need to kind of disentangle the phenomenological approach from the performative approach. I think that the article's approach to temporality is broadly subjectivist in the sense of recognizing the many ways in which time, its perception and its meanings are socially and culturally constructed. But under the umbrella of that broad culturalism, different approaches still lead us to ask different sorts of questions. And I think that there was some tension in the paper between the cultural theories that were being used on the front end and what the empirical focus was on. And once again, I felt like more of the empirical focus was on kind of, probably for data reasons, the performance, right? But there's a lot more to say about, the performance can kind of tend to lean towards thinking about instrumental use of framings of time, justifications of policies on the basis of claims making about historical continuity or discontinuity, and thinking about phenomenological experience in a broader sense of really thinking about how are actors processing the situation they're in and how they will or will not act. That's a different kind of frame of thinking about how temporalities impact action in uncertain situations. It's a little bit different from that question of performance. And so my final set of suggestions here are to continue to mine, I think, the performativity and speech act theory that's really kind of leaned into here in the paper, but also dig deeper into this phenomenological and pragmatist work and work towards a better integration of these approaches. So I want to begin here where I ended with an invitation at the end of this conference here, or close to it, and hopefully a little provocation to continue the conversation that Xiaohong and Isaac initiated in this really creative, sophisticated, and intellectually inspiring article. I think it really stands to spark a new wave of revolution studies that are particularly sensitized to the qualities of time, temporality, and newness. So thank you very much.
Just lucky I haven't tripped yet. Right. So finally, some serious disagreement. I mean, I couldn't be happier because what we're talking about, I mean, we have actually succeeded in making this a massive political sociology event because we've done the two things that you have to do in such an event, which is one, have a major disagreement about how state-society relations work, and two, dispute whether you should have a threefold distinction or a 2x2 table. And we have in fact succeeded in performing both of those things, so this can now be pronounced a successful political sociology conference. Now, I would imagine that because I'm standing back up here, that the performative expectation would be that I would respond to some of these criticisms. I have prepared a text actually about exploratory things going in further directions out from the paper, and I actually am going to talk about those because I think, as you'll see, they actually articulate very much with what we just heard. And I wanted, but I'll start. So I'm going to read some of this and just give my little talk on the paper. But I should start by sort of talking a little bit about the kind of intellectual space that Xiaohong and I spent a lot of time talking about, and that when we were trying to work out this paper in the background. And one of the things that was really about was the adventure that both of us went on over the last 5 to 10 years, really, of having trained in historical and cultural sociology, but confronting political theory and its sort of importance to really broad intellectual traditions of thinking about modernity. So we were fighting about Scotch Paul and revolution, but also, as you'll see, Hannah Arendt on revolution. We were interested in Max Weber's charisma, but also charismatic forces in a broader sense. The concept, for example, of political religions from Eric Voegelin. We talked about a lot of things in the background. It is also true that I'll start here. The paper does take as its sort of premise a certain kind of interpretive approach, although I don't think that makes it unempirical at all, which is that the search for significance, sense and significance, meaning, can occur in a political register. And it was that premise that allows the empirical interpretation of the paper to emerge, that to understand the politics of the CCR, you have to understand the different attempts to interpret the experience of time, and in particular, the way to articulate the break with the past. Okay, so here are my 2 points of further exploration, and this is, the first one is about Jacobinism, so here we go, right? I agree. So the paper repeatedly refers to the Jacobin politics of the CCR. We did intend to signal something by this, and let's just say it was provocative to reviewers as well as to the respondents to the paper today. It's an interesting and difficult question, and I will say, we wanted to work out in another paper, a later paper, the question of Maoism in the 1960s as an apotheosis, or most extensive or even most extreme version of the specifically modern politics that takes its name from the French Revolution. And part of the argument of this paper implicitly is, in fact, that the French Revolution is a kind of partial and in some sense flawed case for looking at Jacobinism, and the CCR is, in fact, should be the paradigmatic case, whatever you want to name it. So it's a historical reversal in that sense. And a couple things here. So how are we thinking about Jacobinism in its, There is a political program of radical equality based in the rhetoric of Jacobin politics. We think of Jacobinism as a politics that is universal in its aim and totalizing in its demand for the remaking of society beyond and through the party state. It tends to feature as central to its operation the problematic of signifying the people or the revolutionary masses in political speech. This signification, we would point out, is itself subject to temporal interpretation via the concept of the revolutionary elite or the vanguard who sees the future of what the people will really need or want. Now, it's tough to write a history of arguing about Jacobinism because it's littered with people who, it's extreme. The history of Jacobinism is written, one, by Jacobins, and two, by intellectuals who blame Jacobinism for the Holocaust, right? I mean, the history of European writing about Jacobinism is that extreme and that intense, because as a kind of formation, right, Eric Voegelin, Claude Lefort, Francois Furet write about Jacobinism as a kind of catastrophe politics of the modern era. So what are we doing here? And why would it be interesting to think about the CCR in particular? I mean, this is interesting, right? Like, I think I would actually really agree with some of what you said about the fluidity and the intensity of the fluidity and chaos of the CCR. But I think there's a particular way in which Xiaohong and I would argue that it is a revolution and a kind of apotheosis. In fact, the most modern format of Jacobin politics that has ever been. And I'll try to explain why. Bear with me, just by referencing Hannah Arendt's discussion of the French Revolution. So Arendt famously traces the dynamics of Jacobin politics, and in particular the Reign of Terror, to three aspects of the French revolutionary situation. One, the collapse of the distinction between public and private in the evaluation of virtue. Two, the conflation in the practices of politics of the recognition of equality with the assumed, the experience of sameness. That is, the expectation, she says, that equality is dependent on seeing everyone as exactly the same, which she thinks is dangerous. And three, in Arendt, she says, the emergence into the political space of the French Revolution of the hunger of the masses as the organizing principle of politics itself. In her view, this destroys political freedom. In many discussions of Arendt, particularly in the American Academy's Arendt industry and its opponents, the third of these is often taken as her only explanation of the terror in the French Revolution. And it's separated from the other two. And in fact, what we want to argue is if you study the CCR and ask questions about Jacobinism as I've defined it here, you'll see that this is actually the least important part of Arendt's interpretation of the Reign of Terror. The CCR's distillation of Jacobin politics disallows this mistake of focusing on the third. In the CCR, it becomes clear that the politics of total remaking of society via destruction of the four olds and the cleaning of culture has three aspects. It takes its distinctive form when the conduct of politics is disembedded entirely from economic demands and economic conflict. Two, the imagination of the revolutionary masses, the imagination is about this new time, right? That the revolutionary masses will enter into a new time. And then three, its universal and totalizing rhetoric is connected to political conduct that is distinctly sectarian. I'm going to say just here that I think it's possible that we don't actually understand Jacobinism yet. We continue to take the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution as paradigmatic in social and political theory. And I'm going to say instead I think that it's the CCR that is the most revealing of the sort of inner meaning logic of this aspect of political modernity. So that's the first area I want to propose as further exploration, and I think it could be a great subject of debate, and I'm going to try to keep working on that, but of course I am in many, many ways limited. The second I want to talk about is actually also related to both of the comments. And it's about this question of when you know that you're in a new time. So when Xiaohong and I were working on this paper, we spent a lot of time trying to work out another threefold distinction. I guess we hate 2x2 tables. I don't know what to tell you. Because this distinction, which we called many different things and ended up not in the paper, is also threefold. And we wanted to characterize a way that people got into, we wanted to have a sort of typology of the way in which it could be decided what the relationship is between new time and carnival time, and basically how those arrows that Rob have up on the screen get drawn. And we kind of came up basically with three ways in which this happens, and as you'll quickly see, they relate to the discussion here. So the first is a sort of vertical or organizational way, where the interpretation of time and experience is located in and limited to the peak of organizations or hierarchical state organizations. This rendering of what kind of time one is in, we argued that did appear many times in the politics of the CCR. And perhaps an exemplary moment, July 27th, 1968, Mao majestically announced to student rebel leaders when they complained that there was a black hand working against them. He raised his hand and said, "I am the black hand." He was essentially telling them that he decided on when it wasn't a new time anymore. And I think more broadly, we can think of a lot of comparative cases where a narrow state elite decides sort of what kind of time to project to everybody else. However, that is not the only source of conflict over what kind of time you're in. Our second category is generational. And we really felt that in the data was this sort of sense of political conflict as generational conflict, and in particular the sense of the significance of life being a matter of generational conflict. So I mentioned this already. By the way, generational notions of new time is actually what Hannah Arendt is obsessed with, because she's obsessed with how you can found a republic with a constitution and then everybody else mythologizes those people and does democratic politics, even if it was founded in a moment of violence. So the generational one is interesting. And then the last one is mass collective attempts to articulate new time in large groups. And I think this is the most difficult, and as we hear from the argument here, this is what the big argument is about the CCR, that is, was it in a certain sense top-down state propaganda, or was there in fact a kind of mass movement that was about the utopian promises of modernity, variably interpreted? And that, I think, we argue is recognizable in this Maoist moment. And it's something that we wanted to return to. The larger sort of like question then, right? Right, is not just the kind of failure. Yeah, and I'm almost done. And the larger question is actually whether one can think about time in this way. And the social conflict over time as really at the core of conflict over political aspiration. The degree to which political conflict is political conflict over time and therefore over revolutionary or reformist aspiration, utopian dream, or pragmatic policy. In our understanding from this study, one sort of way to move forward would to look for the inflections of time in political conflict. And with that, my time is up.
Questions?
Thanks. Has been a very fruitful panel, and I guess I have two questions for Rob and maybe Isaac. And the first one is like, I think the slides that Rob showed has been really helpful in terms of like, what's the value added of like a sociology of time, or like paying more attention to temporalities. And so I guess my question is like, is the main morale or like the main implication for paying more attention to time or temporality is helping us to discern what kind of changes that we are talking about, what forms of, there are like a various form of change that we're talking about. Is that the main morale or like implication for future research? And that's the first one. And the second one is, I really like the Mark quote that Rob flagged here, like now stop mentioning historically unprecedented. And that's like he being cautious about, like, in a way identifying like new time or like previous times. And but now, like when it comes to crisis, political crisis in the past few years, or like maybe in a lot of moment in human histories, like we kind of calling for the future we don't want to see, or the future we want to see numerously, constantly. And so there's like a abuse, if not abuse, like overuse of certain language. Like, oh, this is like the darkest day of our democracy, or this is the last day of blah, 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 like this apocalyptic kind of moment. So I'm curious to know, like, what's your take on, for research, like how do you, you know, how do you gather evidence, or like to mark, this is like the right way to tell like the time that is exactly the time we are living in, not like something else. Yeah, thanks.
Sure, I guess.
Yeah, maybe we can get a couple questions.
Okay, sure.
I think I have a comment more than a question, but it's for Robert, and it builds well on what has just been expressed. I like your distinction between collective memory, the moment of the present, and future expectations. But I think that when I interview people who have chosen to leave their countries, you know, they're emigres, that all three of those are one moment for them, you know, that they make a decision based on the fact that they no longer see a future in their country, and on the basis of their own experiences in the past. And of course, they're living in the present. So they're intellectually, you can disentangle them, but at the level of people's decision-making and feelings and attitudes, I think that they're all one.
So how does this, is that on? Okay, I'm good, okay. So I think that I think I can at least start with an answer that I think speaks to both of these questions together, and I'll start with Ilun's, thinking about like what's the value added of sociology of time and temporalities, and where exactly to be intervening here. And you were asking about, is it really about kind of the different rhythms and types of change? I guess what I would emphasize for myself, and not claim to speak for Xiaohong or Isaac at all, but thinking about in my own work, I think in many ways I think of myself as kind of like a micro-sociologist masquerading as sometimes a macro-sociologist, and that I really am interested in the context of action in which people are actually doing things in that present moment, and to Sylvia's point, like the context of actually deciding whether to emigrate or not, right? And in many ways, you know, social action is always unfolding in a present, but it's oriented towards that action in the present is oriented towards some idea of what's to come, and oriented towards some sense of where we're coming from. And I think that what this, and in a way, I'm kind of taking that kind of very subjectivist, internalist kind of view for granted. And I think that that's one of the things I really like about this article, is that it really opens up the richness of seeing in these moments of ambiguity and uncertainty, how is it that people are making sense of a situation that you in many ways can't make sense of, and how are they kind of deciding how to act in these unfolding situations. So there's the kind of objective sequencing of the unfolding situations, but I think I'm much more interested in how actors are attending to these temporalities in different ways. So I don't mean them as kind of objective distinctions, but.
Another question? I'll answer that really quickly. So I think the temporality for me, and I really learned this from Xiaohong, so I have to say, like, so I've always wanted to work, I've always been a hermeneutic and performative sociologist in terms of my empirics and how I do interpretation, and temporality is part of really a much more serious phenomenology, like that, in the sense that the intentional consciousness of time being part of the making of political meanings. And so in that sense, I think and in that sense, to talk about phenomenology is not just to have another word for subjectivity, but to talk about this thing in particular about existing in time and space, and that somehow connecting to politics. And what I would say about that is, I tend not to believe lots of overblown rhetoric about crisis and apocalypse, but I guess I would ask an analysis to try to come up with a phenomenological redescription of why one's research subjects are speaking apocalyptically. What is the experience of time that is in fact making that rhetoric have both meaning and resonance? And I think that's the added aspect of time is a kind of more robust phenomenology as part of interpretive historical sociology.
Okay, so I think, let's see, is it, okay, how about we collect Juan, Mark, Mary, and is there anybody else, and Julia, and super fast, and then the panelists can decide what to say, and then we're done, okay? So.
Sure. Thank you so much for this great and very engaging panel. In thinking about future sort of research development, I had a question perhaps for the three of you. To what extent do you think we could do a sociology of time and temporality without thinking and including a sociology of space and scales? Mm-hmm. And to what extent thinking about some kind of composite analysis of time scales, for instance, would help solve some of the issues that have been raised today? For instance, basically who's doing the performance, basically where, right? To what extent we're talking about elite spaces or massive spaces where these experiences of time are happening and in variable scales that could be partially overlapping. Is this something that you see productive, or do you think it's better to keep the sociology of time separated from the sociology of space?
Okay, Mark.
I know very little about the Cultural Revolution, even less about the French Revolution, so this is primarily an informational question. But I'm kind of puzzled by this focus on comparing the two, insofar as my understanding of the Reign of Terror is this is right after the revolution. It's happening almost immediately, whereas the Cultural Revolution, Mao had been in power for some time, the bureaucracy had become entrenched, and this was a reaction to something that had been going on for 20 years or maybe longer. And so I'm a little bit confused. I mean, I see the parallels in terms of the reaction and the mob actions and those kinds of things, but I'm also, they don't seem that parallel to or analogous to me.
Okay. Mary?
This is a question for Young, and it's not directly around this argument about time in the piece, but it's more about the engagement with other arguments about the Cultural Revolution, and particularly your quote from Andy Walder. Because a lot of what Andy has been presenting recently about, and emphasizing, and you too, in your own work, the role of the state and the role of elites in mobilizing the violence, which goes against this kind of rational interest argument, as well as maybe the revolutionary one that is put out here. But so I don't know if you want to defend the quote. You have it in your but so to say that I don't know what elites are trying to do versus what people think is actually happening when they're doing it are two different things. And I think in some ways Walder's argument really takes away agency from people. Particularly if we think about this as a national movement, and of course in Beijing, yeah, maybe university students are more directly being directed by state elites, but the Cultural Revolution was a nationwide occurrence, and as your work in rural China shows, very devastating. Rational people kill each other all of the time. It's not something that is difficult to explain. So I guess, I don't know what I guess I want you to, why is that quote a critique of the arguments that are put forward, either in this piece or in other pieces that Xiaohong has written about the Cultural Revolution?
Okay, and Julia? Oh, was there someone else? Oh, trying to get in there? Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry. If we can
I
collect
realize
one more.
there's no way the panel can answer all this, but we could keep talking about it, but, at the last session and then over dinner also, right? So question for all, is there really a contradiction between the positivist and post-positivist Xiaohong?
Just a little tiny question.
The tiny question, so I would just submit that even in the terms of the panel, we seem in analyzing politics to need all the resources that we have to analyze discourse, emotion, et cetera, but we also need to systematically count social facts. And I think about this in the context of contemporary America. If we're going to understand the present moment, we certainly need to understand, e.g., who is, patterns of voting, et cetera, but also the slogans like "Make America Great Again," which really kind of exemplifies Rob's triadic notion of time, a brilliant invocation calling on people to mobilize a reimagined past right now on behalf of a revolutionary future.
Yeah, okay. So let's add one more, and we might actually have to wait and allow the panelists to respond over dinner, perhaps, so that we can move on to taking a short break and then really short and coming back. So, but yes, let's add one more, probably another small question.
No. It's actually small. I'm wondering if, so I take what Yang was talking about. I got you really do not like the revolution, the term revolution, but can we also have just a revolution time, like in terms of not specific institutional results, or like, but then there is also the moment of time that can be revolutionary, that can be. So I'm just trying to think if this concept itself can still be extended, even though we have debates about what this time period really is, but really to think more dynamics about like the process itself, to give it more dimension. And in that way, this is actually very difficult to approach using a positivist approach, actually.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so
Can I go?
one, I'll give, yes, you didn't get as much, so yes, why don't you have the last word here for now, but then we have plenty of other time over dinner, et cetera. Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
that will be too much an honor.
Go ahead.
You had it. Yeah, there you go. You're good.
Julia, in an earlier speech, I said I imagine if Xiaohong live longer, and two Xiaohong will shake hands and hug each other. Mary and Yan. Yes, the question I think will be, I was being provocative. I will vote for both to consider. Just that, like earlier, Yan in the morning says, these two versions emphasize on the elite manipulation and the persecution will be robbed the agency of the actors. And the other side of it, you call it revolution, has a lot of implications, too much assuming their agency and what they can do and information-wise as well. So in other words, to be a very happy ending, I would say I will vote for two perspectives together. When you look at Cultural Revolution, why not say these two things? So I retreat from my position a little bit when I'm not. And this is very much in line with earlier question about pace and scale. Why not we look at this time in the qualitative nature of the time as well. It makes a lot of sense that if it is a chaos, it's one thing and a new time. If it's a relatively organized revolution event, it's another. This is why this is important. If I go back to your own article, the third point, in fact, it carries my question for Isaac, in fact, I hope. It is, in your third section, you said the current Communist Party discredit all the protests using Cultural Revolution as excuse. Okay. And that, your article seems to be, you are defining the nature of the Cultural Revolution to be more benign than the Communist Party claimed. And if you follow what I'm trying to say, if the nature of the chaos indeed is pretty chaotic, pretty horrible. In fact, after New Time, my book about the mass killings took place after the New Time. And so if it is indeed so horrible, then you may blame them to use that as much, but I blame them. Like Xiaohong and you, of course I resent all the authorities to blame protests using whatever excuse they use, right? Communist Party used Cultural Revolution to demonize rebellion. I understand that. You guys try to rescue the big word of rebellion. And the American society, American authority media, right now, demonize the protesters, picking up certain elements to demonize them. If they don't have Cultural Revolution excuse, they use other excuse to demonize. So my question, in fact, I was genuinely curious. Do you have really have some normative intent in your article? Try to rescue Cultural Revolution to be a, I would not say to put it in a good name, to be a better name as being understood. Do you have a normative intent? The article reads like, because you said festivities of the repressed, for instance. I will all for it, if it is the case. That's my answer.
Okay. Wow. Okay, I think there's a lot more to discuss, but let's take, and we'll have dinner, but let's take like 5 minutes and come back because we have concluding remarks by Roy and Jan to kind of wrap some things up a little bit. So 5 minutes or thereabouts.
So Jan and I will offer some concluding personal remarks. And Jan will start and I will follow. But before we start, Emily asked me to remind everyone that on the back side of the program, there's a QR code. And if you scan it, you get exactly to the point on the website of the conference where you can leave personal notes and memories about Xiaohong. So please see yourself invited to use it.
I guess it has been a long, productive, almost therapeutic day. So I'm going to just take some time and talk about Xiaohong as a friend, as a person. But if you know him, you know that he often talks about he has friends who he interact in terms of like have this kind of scholarly conversation, and then their friend, he just engages them with no scholarly conversation in the letter. We're like, oh, it's not real friends.
So for Xiaohong, it's actually, in many ways, it's very difficult to separate him from a scholar, from like he's being as a human being. But that part, I'm just going to try to talk more about his personal side, since we have spoken so much about his intellectual legacy. I had very little sleep. My body is not really, it's kind of collapsing. So forgive me if I say something stupid, which tend to happen a lot. So Xiaohong was a very rare Chinese intellectual who thought very deeply about issues that have consumed generations of intellectuals in China since the Main Force in 1990. So it has been like the hundreds of years of this kind of really like a lot of burden on us when you want to become intellectual speaking for China. But he brought so much theoretical and analytical vigor to the contemporary chapter of the national drive to modernity. And his critical distance and complex reasoning were very impressive. It's so impressive sometimes. Last year was really difficult because I just really wanted him to live. And his passing hit me very hard, and for several months I resented sociology and the job as sociologist for the first time in my whole life, because it was just not fair. He worked so hard. In many ways, I was hoping, like, because seeing his success for me was really to show that the discipline is good. The discipline would, award people who work hard, who love hard, who just put their heart out there, their passion out there, not just for their career, but really for the discipline and for knowledge production. So today I wanted to focus my remarks on some of the words that Xiaohong really liked: being, becoming, and belonging. So there were various never-ending tensions and contradictions in Xiaohong's life in terms of his being, the geopolitics between China and the US, the conflict between his dedication to China and to general social theory as it's currently defined, between his role as a professional sociologist and a broader intellectual thinker, between his pursuit as a scholar and an activist, between his rural family and this high cultural world he entered, and between his deep concern for knowledge and social change and his love for his family. So obviously many battles he was fighting were not unique at all. They reflected the broader social transformation of this era. And in reality, Xiaohong did not succeed in all those aspects, all those fights. But what never failed to amaze me was how he never compromised. He never gave up. None of the punches life threw at him propelled him to take any less risk or become any less gracious or generous. In fact, he was always able to find personal and intellectual nourishments from the diversities with a smile. It was in this very long process of keeping struggling that his dreams of becoming and belonging came to fruition, and it has impacted, touched the people around him in such a great way. So many of you probably already know, Xiaohong was born into a farmer's family in Quzhou in southeast China. The lack of material and cultural resources did not stop him from obtaining a very key interest in political transformations from a very young age. He actually rarely spoke about the hardship and things. In general, he never complained. If you haven't noticed, in his personal life, he didn't complain. And when I was talking to him about I didn't know how to write acknowledgement to for my parents in my book, because I was like, well, they don't really read book. I don't know what this means to them, given all their sacrifices. And Xiaohong was like, well, but it is great to create something on your own, and you should be very proud of yourself. Mind you, he's such a Bourdieuian scholar, and he knows all the field and everything, but he never ever, like many other people, he never applied those kind of theory on himself to say, hey, look at me, I've suffered, I have all those things he never, the self-pity just never ever was his thing. So Xiaohong fought his way into Peking University, one of China's most prestigious schools. Initially, he pursued chemistry, a field promising a stable and comfortable future career. But he quickly switched to sociology. He edited his renowned journal, China Scholarship. He engaged in liberal political activism and immersed himself in the vibrant circle of critical theory and avant-garde culture. Xiaohong was really not a stereotypical good student per se at the time. Later, people were saying, "Oh my God, can you believe he became a professor?" Back then, he could not even find a date. He spent way more time sort of in philosophy department, in sociologist department per se. He skipped a lot of classes, and he just dealt with exams by borrowing notes from other people. His activism put him on the sort of top 10 sensitive people on the sort of gray area sort of list of the department. So a lot of people have to watch him at a specific time, and he was very proud of it. Basically, unlike a typical student, he spent a lot of time just reading and talking about the readings. During that time, Xiaohong was actually not interested in sociologists like Blue. That was totally beneath him. But after reading Leszek Kolakowski's Main Currents of Marxism, he told others in excitement, quote, this is from his other friend, "I will become an international intellectual elite like Kolakowski when I turn 40, quote. For those of you who are not familiar with Kolakowski, he was a Polish philosopher and historian of ideas who was exiled from his country. He spent most of his remainder of his career in the UK. This gives you some sense about his personality. He was never ever shy about talking about his dreams, and he took action. He tried everything. And it was always those kind of two dreams, knowledge production and social change, that excited him despite of the financial situation. Pursuing a scholarly life was really not a practical decision for him. In college, he was working multiple jobs to help with his family. Actually, when he was applying for graduate school, but he couldn't get in during that time, he started a consulting firm in Beijing with several friends, basically to help people to write applications, graduate school applications. They got busted after, I think, 1 month. The police raided their office. He actually managed to escape without getting caught. Okay, so it's not like he was naive. He knew about money. He knew those things were important. But still, he chose sociology. And he went to Yale after getting a master at Notre Dame. The process of getting a visa was very challenging for him. And he had to live with a friend at the dorm to just save money. But this, again, whenever he talked about the problem, the challenges, he just always emphasized the bright side. Unlike a very critical sort of sociology that you would expect. And he later told me that he actually felt really fortunate because in the 2000s, at the time, people like him still had the opportunity to pursue a graduate school sort of a kind of career. But nowadays, when you look at it, it's very difficult for people with a bachelor degree in China to come here and become a doctoral student. You have to have the financial resources and all those things to even start in college here. So during that time, Xiaohong was still very closely connected to communities in China. He was still helping different friends with their academics, publishing, their translation, and he was creating a new community at Yale. Many people at Yale told me like Xiaohong was he just like a magnet that attract different people. And his home with Long become such like a warm space that people would go to. They would, talk and all things. And Xiaohong was a mentor to many people. Okay, so when he first came to the United States, his English was really not good. But then he's a master, so he had created a lot of skills and sort of just learning on his own. He would give suggestions such as, if you want to learn English, you can just pick one scholar you admire and read all of their work, just like Marx. Then your English would improve. Okay, so this kind of suggestions he give. He really created this kind of space of dream, like what compared to historical sociologists when they really need the courage and like, this is going to be hard, but you can do it. To just give you one example of how powerful that kind of warmth and community he was creating. So one of my co-author, Wei Luo, who is teaching at Peking University right now, so she received offer from multiple schools to graduate school, and including Michigan, I think Harvard, Chicago, a bunch of schools. And she decided to go to Yale. And mind you, like at the time, Professor George Simons was very interested in working with her. He was so angry at her. He wrote an email to her like, how can you pick Yale over Michigan? I can understand it if you pick Chicago maybe. Okay, so this is the thing. So Wei later told me why she made the decision she made. She said she went on different campus visits. When she went to Yale, Xiaohong picked her up and took her home and long cooked this tomato and egg stir fry and noodle. And of course, there was brilliant Julie Adams. So she made her decision, and she never regret. She said that it's just a wonderful, wonderful place. And communities are really hard, are really, really hard, especially for graduate students. And for me, at the time, there were two communities, like at Yale and then at Chicago, for Chinese students who were doing qualitative study, because from Michigan, like everybody just assumed I was a UC student. So at ASA, I had nobody to talk to. So I had to hang out with, other Chinese students at those different schools. And like Xiaohong and his entourage at the time, I always call. And they provided so much support. And when Xiaohong got his R&R, like from ASR, I remember like everybody at Yale was so proud. It was a collective thing. It's like for Chinese, like who does this kind of research to get to that kind of place, as like everybody was just happy. Early on in graduate school, he actually had various interests. He learned all kinds of language. He tried different things. He had gazillions of ideas. Whenever he talked to people, then he would have this new research project, that new research project. But I think after, probably beginning in 2011, he began to think about his career. We talk about, what to wear to ASA. He asked me, like, what should I wear at ASA? I was like, well, just don't participate in the ugliest outfit competition. You'll be fine. And we were on the job market together, and he had this like purse with him. He had his resume printed out. Whenever we spoke to people, he just pulled it out. I was like, dude, this is too much pressure. And I also remember the time he was confident because he had an ASR, and we always thought, okay, he had an award, he would find a job, because he just deserved it. It's like it was such a great scholar. But no, he didn't get anything in the U.S. And I remember we actually went to a lecture about sharing experience about looking for jobs for Chinese students. And the advice we got is do quantitative research, forget about the theory, or you go back to China or accept the fact that you will be at a mediocre school your whole life. I remember I was shaking afterwards. And it was a very scary fact. I'm not talking about the things like just to complain. No, I just wanted to tell you, when we talk about all those big ideas, all those persistence, it's not because he had the luxury to do so. It's on the contrary. He had all the reasons to just publish on like narrow topic and all those things. And imagine like even in graduate school, he already published ASR. He knows how to publish. He could have picked like a different path, but he didn't. When he went to the National University of Singapore, he actually was excited initially. He told me that the job talk was great. People asked wonderful questions. And then he started a series of like very challenging projects, including the misruling elites you heard about today. But at the time, he started to feel the pressure because book publishing was not allowed there. He had to publish like articles. And it was a really difficult time for him to find this kind of intellectual home. And what made it worse was the family dynamic, like they were doing long distance. Once Xiaohong, it was right on the final exam, he was showing his picture of the ultrasound picture of his daughter. He was so happy, like, oh, tomorrow I'm go back and see my wife. And he was just very worried about the basic, like Lan was pregnant in the US alone, and there was snow and he couldn't help, and he had to learn how to work on the plane. And he talked about like, I can give you tips. This is the mentor role, like how to work efficiently, effectively on the plane. And at the time, Xiaohong began to really think about going back to China. At the time, he still maintained intellectual sort of connections to many people in the U.S. But that was the time when the China-U.S. relationship began to get intense. I mean, the rise of China, the expansion of authoritarianism, and all those things. And many of our like previous activist friends, they either got arrested or many of them became like the supporter of the regimes. And some of the people began, even in the sociology community, refused to cite his work. And this is the thing is he had to establish a network for himself in Beijing. If he wanted to, he really could just go back and he could just fit in that circle, but he did not want to. He really wanted to maintain that critical distance and the complexity of the research, which was not really fitting very well with the Chinese community of scholar. So this is where I always think, so Sidney Terra has this term of rooted cosmopolitan like activist, and I think Xiaohong is rooted cosmopolitan scholar. The term means that the scholar live in the sort of transnational space. They're either there or they're here. So they had to deal with like multiple layers of different opportunities, but also constraints. But most importantly, they are very committed to and embedded in their localities. Okay, so that is the rooted part come from. So what always surprised me was, even though at the time he had so many problems with the university, he still immersed himself in the Singapore sort of community, and he was absorbing a lot of new knowledge and new insights from Asia. Again, he was really hoping to like, where is my career? What am I going to do? But that was the time when he stopped becoming, I guess that's what Su Yang was talking about, the previous and the later sort of Xiaohong, and the changes really took place, at least based on my observation, was that time period. You see, he was frustrated with the typical American way of doing sociology, and he wanted to really incorporate more of the China context and the Chinese local experience into really put China at the forefront of theorization and conceptualization. And that's when he became much more sort of post-positivist and all the exploration of critical realism and all those things. under it did not take very long for him to stop engaging with the old intellectuals in China. So he made the decision. And that's the thing is also that time when you have anniversaries, people became bitter, they're like resentful and all those things. But for Xiaohong, no, he was becoming even more kind and generous. I think his experiences in Singapore and all that kind of sort of turbulence somehow made him even more aware of other people's problems. So just to give you an example, the first cultural thing I learned in the United States is when people ask you, how are you? They're not really asking, how are you? Okay, you're supposed, especially in the academic setting, there are a bunch of things you're supposed to say, like, I'm great. You want to hear like my most recent success. And Xiaohong was one of my very few sort of, especially male sociology friends who he listened to you. Even with all kind of women's more of the home problem, the practical issues, and money problems, he listens to you. He doesn't give you like, oh, what am I supposed to do now this person is talking about all this uncomfortable women, female stuff. No, he does not give you that kind of silence. He engages you, he listens to you, he really cares, and he remembers. And that was the kind of a generosity that he offered was really very difficult to even imagine given his own. Oh my God, I'm taking so much time. So sorry. Okay, let me just add one more thing. When he moved to Livne University, again, he really needed to focus on his career, but again, he was very much engaged in the local activism. And that was also the sort of the social transformation. I think he really absorbed all that things. He took his daughter to for example, I think the June 4th Tiananmen Memorial, and he talked about like the reasons we fight, the reasons we want to make a brighter future is exactly for the children, and look at their their eyes, and that was really what. That was something that, as his scholarly Xiaohong, but also the fatherly Xiaohong began to come together. And one of the things I'm really thankful to Michigan is, I remember like how happy he was when he got the offer, and then he came. He was like, I'm more relaxed now. I actually could spend time with my daughter. He's like, I can do all those things. I can be the intellectual. I can take even more risk. Oh my God, even bigger research and all those. He was really happy, and for that, thank you.
So I was worried that I would be the first and only person today to cry on stage. So thank you, Yan, for not leaving me alone in this. On January 27, we gathered not too far from here at the chapel of the American Friends Service Committee for Xiaohong's memorial service. And at the end of the service, we watched a video with a personal message from Xiaohong, which Lang had recorded in the hospice shortly after Xiaohong concluded the lecture about the Cultural Revolution to a group of friends who flew in from across the country, and about 48 hours before he left us. I think it's a good time for me to say goodbye, Xiaohong said in the beginning of this video, to a fruitful life filled with purpose. For a few moments he spoke about his childhood, and then seamlessly and naturally ventured into a long tangent about Durkheim, Weber, Bourdieu, and Napoleon, which, dare I say, very few of us, if any, managed to follow. The sobs that were initially heard in the chapel when Xiaohong's face appeared on the monitor, so thin, pale, and fragile, gave way to chuckles. This was the Xiaohong we all knew, remembered, and loved. Mortally ill, for sure, and yet himself and in a very counterintuitive way at his very best. But to what extent, but to what was Xiaohong referring when he said that his life was, quote, filled with purpose? A few weeks after his death, Lang penned a penetrating essay about Xiaohong's life and hers. It is a riveting, honest, and painful text about merciless academic structures, lifestyles, and internalized expectations, and about what this lifestyle does to academics and to their families. If souls existed, Lang began, Xiaohong would surely be astonished by the deep love and praise from his friends. I am also surprised and proud of him. I post them on my social media, thanking the authors and forwarding them to my parents, hoping that they would finally understand that their daughter's stubbornness 20 years ago was not misguided. My intuition tells me that he would appreciate me doing this. He wanted more people, the whole world, to know what kind of person he was, how hard he worked to become a perfect individual, disproving the stereotypical image of the Phoenix man. This is the internet term used to describe overachieving Chinese men from rural backgrounds. Was this effort to prove oneself a theme throughout his life? It truly breaks my heart. Xiaohong, as Lang described him in this essay, was, quote, a feminist man working within a patriarchal structure, end of quote, torn between, on the one hand, the constant overbearing and uncontrolled impulse, so familiar to anyone working within the academia, to prove himself to himself and to others, immerse himself in thinking, reading, and writing, aspire to reach beyond, leave a mark, make an impact, be better. And, on the other hand, a vague and barely conscious sense that this impulse to achieve recognition and leave an impact is self-devouring, and that the immersion in intellectual pursuits can make one blind and oblivious to non-intellectual and worldly matters, to life itself, to common sense, to love, that it can bring one to a place of emotional detachment and apathy. Tragically enough, Xiaohong was well aware and wary of this risk of apathy. And God knows he was not apathetic to apathy. Indeed, he was able to dissect and analyze it, weave feminism and Weber together, specify the shortcomings of rationalistic thinking, point out that the heart can feel what analytic eyes cannot see, and analyze the historical structures and strictures that condition his own observations and his own points of blindness. But the irony here is clear. Analyzing emotions intellectually cannot substitute feeling and living these emotions. For Xiaohong, it seems, the feelings that he confronted at the end of his life were too intense and too overwhelming to be felt directly. As Lang wrote, at some point during his last days, Xiaohong told her that he wanted to write something personal to his daughter before he died, but then never really got to do it. After he finished dictating his academic will to me, and after he concluded his Cultural Revolution lecture to his other friends, he gradually sank into terminal delirium. But even then, at a time that and shrink in training, Lang had hoped would bring some suppressed insight from his emotional subconscious, Xiaohong delivered sociological lectures to imaginary audiences, introduced speakers, and responded to obscure theoretical arguments. Xiaohong's intellectual motivation, ambition, curiosity, and focus were absolute and all-consuming. They went all the way down to the foundations of his personality. They made up his interior grammar. Saying that academic life was a vocation for Xiaohong as opposed to just a job does not do justice to how total his approach to scholarship was. Xiaohong lived an intellectual life because he was ontologically an intellectual through and through, and because he could do no other. It was a reality which defined him, probably more than any other person that I've ever known in my life. And he owned and embraced this reality. At a particularly punchy part of her essay, by far my favorite, Lang wrote, "I wish I could carve a QR code on his tombstone so that all curious passers-by can easily access his scholarship." I can imagine Xiaohong enjoying the joke and then going online to search if this would be possible. And here we are, 6 months later, doing the same, reading, discussing, analyzing Xiaohong's analysis, living and breathing sociology, history, culture, politics, doing our best to bracket the emotional charge, say a few tame sentences about the immense loss that we feel, about friendship, shed no more tears than the occasion makes appropriate, doing exactly what Xiaohong would have wanted us to do. Do not get distracted by the tragedy. Focus on his fucking arguments. It took me 4 full days to read the 50 pages that make up The Great Separation, an article that I had read at least twice before because I was so emotional. And the only thing I'm confident about is that I did a lousy job representing it here. Alas, the sociologists go marching one by one. Hurrah, hurrah. What is the purpose? A couple of days before Xiaohong died, Phil and Hela Gorski flew in to see him. He was deeply touched. In the hospice reception area, Phil told me about how excited Xiaohong was when he got the job offer from the University of Michigan. And I can imagine. Xiaohong had had a hard time in Hong Kong, and Michigan sociology is among the best places in the world for comparative historical political sociologists. It was a place where he could do the work he wanted to do unapologetically. He probably felt that he has reached the promised land. I know that there was also ambivalence, lots of it. Xiaohong moved from Hong Kong in the turbulent summer of 2019, and he arrived here with a strong sense that his place was in the streets of Hong Kong, marching and organizing and advocating for democracy and socialism, living the collective effervescence of the moment. How hard it was for him to drop everything, cross the ocean, and settle into the proverbial role of a traditional intellectual. I also know that only 10 years earlier, things felt different to him. Xiaohong once told me that when he was a doctoral student at Yale, he was certain that he would want to be a sociologist of China in China. In his mind, China was the best place in the world to be a sociologist, a country with a vibrant, dynamic, involved, and innovative sociological community, and a country which, unlike the US, took sociologists and sociological research seriously. When I tell this to Chinese students today, they laugh at me bitterly. When we look at how the Hong Kong that Xiaohong left only 5 years ago has succumbed to authoritarianism and capitalism, one can only sigh in desperation. And so, back in 2019, his excitement of the opportunity to move here was real. Xiaohong spent 4.5 years at the University of Michigan. 2 of them were COVID years, 2 of them were cancer years. Half a year was normal, so little normality. It was probably the reality of social distancing during COVID that made me so unaware of how many close friends he had. Xiaohong was so kind and charismatic that he charmed people. Now it's my turn. That he charmed people in everywhere, in every place he set foot. Excuse me. Professionally, the years here were not easy on him. Articles were rejected. He revised them, and then he revised them again. He had a publication gap between 2017 and 2023 that really concerned him. And he had the general feeling that he has not been making enough progress in his career and in his life. He got his PhD in 2014, had 3 assistant professor appointments in 3 different countries, and 8 years later, at the age of 44, diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, he could still not say that his record was tenurable. At some point in 2022, he told me that it was important for him to be promoted and be tenured, and of course I pushed back. I fully understood his frustration from the academic publication process. Reviewers who don't get it and force us into arduous Sisyphean work of revising ad infinitum. The misruling elite, which Theory and Society published post-mortem about 3 months ago, was first submitted as a complete article in 2017, 7 years earlier. This is frustrating. I have been there myself. But why hinge your self-esteem on the bureaucratic criteria of promotion and tenure rather than on your own substantive work and interests as a scholar, let alone your life beyond as a partner, a parent, and friend? But I think I understand Xiaohong better today. Xiaohong was a person who walked a very long path in his life, from childhood in a poor village in rural China to a district school, to a top high school in his province, to the top university of his country, and on to some of the world's most prestigious titles of higher education. Xiaohong was drawn to comparative historical political sociology, historically the most male and white-dominated field in the discipline, heavy in prestige, overflowing with testosterone, self-importance, and hefty symbolic capital. So many debates in this field take the form of scathing personal judgments and attacks on people's character as scholars, how much one has read, how much one understood or misunderstood, and how much one knows or doesn't know. So many people in the field put on airs as a method of intellectual engagement. Enter Xiaohong Xu, a mythical harpy, part phoenix, part Cinderella, who does not fall within any American-made DEI box, overflowing with kindness, generosity, and a genuine wish to learn and profess sociology. When you walk such a long path in your life, you feel that your life ought to have a coda. It needs to culminate with you delivering something, reaching somewhere, having purpose. Promotion and tenure would do. After all, they are a bureaucratically certified promised land. And then, all of a sudden, the publication started to land. Sociological theory, then theory and society. There was an R&R that he co-authored with Livne from National Taiwan University, which looked very promising. Early in the fall, Elizabeth Armstrong told me that she wanted Xiaohong's third year review committee to consider an early tenure process. When I told him that days before he died, Xiaohong was silent for a few seconds and then said, "I do not regret anything." He did not regret being so uncompromising in his academic writing. He did not regret the cost that he paid for his unyielding intellectualism, prolonged review processes, and slow publication pace. Like Moses, he saw the promised land but did not get there, but it was worth it to him. He wrote what he wanted to write in the way he wanted to write it. He lived a fruitful life, a life with purpose. I want to extend my own gratitude to all the people who participated in organizing this day. First and foremost, the real organizers of this conference, whom Elizabeth mentioned in the beginning. The people who made the actual thing happen, namely the staff of the Department of Sociology and the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies, and especially Jeannie Worrell, Jen Eshelman, Emily Buckley, Guichu Wang, and Alexis Wu, who figured out flights, hotels, catering, coffee, funding, locations, advertising, and a truly gorgeous website and flyers. They've been working on this conference for months and have done this work with so much care, patience, and dedication that made clear just how important it was for them that this event would happen and succeed. Elizabeth Armstrong, Mary Gallagher, and Anne Lynn have been supportive of Xiaohong and his family since way before the conference. The last year of Xiaohong's life was extremely challenging in terms of his administrative relationship with the university, and the three of them were loyal and creative advocates who found solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable. This is also the time to mention again Jen Eshelman, a future dean of the University of Michigan School for finding solutions to what is unsolvable. It was a joke. I want to thank again Kyle Wilson for being our IT team with 0 glitches today. And I want to thank again our wonderful student volunteers, Jaron Long, Daniel Reynolds, Yanzi Yu, and Howie Zhang, who orchestrated the Q&As masterfully. Jen Chao Tang is taking on writing an article about this conference for the ASA's Cultural Sociology section newsletter, which is wonderful. And special thanks to you all present here and those who joined us online, the numerous speakers who carved out time from their schedules, interrupted their summers and flew into us to join us, and the locals who stayed in Ann Arbor to participate and or attend this conference. You know how much Xiaohong would have enjoyed and loved this event. This could be the coda Xiaohong was looking for, and so this is for him. The last thing we should do is having a conversation about how to move forward from here. Xiaohong requested that we publish The Great Separation as a book, and Rob Yang and I will work on revising the manuscript according to the instructions that he left us. This is one article, and I hope to be able to print it along with the 3 responses that we heard this morning in the first panel. We now also have 3 roundtables with excellent commentary on other things that Xiaohong wrote. If there are people who would be willing, interested in taking the initiative and see if they can publish it somewhere as a group, this will be, of course, more than welcome. If others prefer to continue engaging these ideas in their own future work, this too will be a way to make the ideas continue living. So at 6 o'clock, we're meeting for a reception at the Rackham Assembly Hall. This is 4th floor at Rackham. We'll walk there together for a reception and dinner. And thanks a lot for coming. And Lang wants to say something.
Thank you. Roy had asked me several times if I want to say something, and every time I just say, no, this is your professional, this is not my field. I will be just sit in a corner and listen and learn. I guess I underestimate my talkativeness, but I will be short, I promise. I just would like to thank you all for making this happen, and you have the list of names. I will ask that from you. I have a little gift from each of our speakers who came from even as far as from California. So this is the music I would like to give to you. This is Horowitz in Moscow. This is a concert in 1986. This made me think of Xiaohong a lot. Horowitz was born in Russian Empire and left Soviet Union. And this is his homecoming concert after being in the West for 60 years. And the tickets of the concert went mostly to socialist elite. And the students who couldn't get the tickets were shouting out of the concert hall, trying to get in. They say in some of the recording, not sure about if you can hear it from this one, but in some version of the recording, they say you can even hear the students shouting and protesting from outside. I think Xiaohong would be very feel this is a fantastic moment and would offer some of his interpretations. And another reason is one of the pieces of music that Horowitz is most famous for is this piece called Traumere, which means dream in German. I was obsessed with this song, and I feel it's the third to the last song here. I felt it's a mourning song for some people who die very young. And a pianist friend didn't agree with me, so I was searching online for evidence and found that this song, a cappella version of this song, is played in Russia now every year at a Victory Day for those soldiers who died at a very young age during World War II. And then after that, after I found this piece of evidence on Xiaohong's birthday, which is May 9th, Roy told me, oh, this is a victory day. So actually this song is played on his victory day. So, and also it means dream. I know you all know that he's a dreamer. And thank you for coming to Ann Arbor to let his dream alive and to help him to fulfill his dream. Thank you. And when I ordered this disc from Amazon, and Amazon turned out to be very socialist, it has a purchase limit, like 4 copies a day. and if you search this title on Amazon now, there may be 0 copy in stock because I got them all over 9 days, not over 3 days. I got 9 copies in total. That's the whole amount I can get. So I prioritize those people who told me they still use a CD player and those people who came from afar. So that for the rest of you, you will receive a link from iTunes tonight where you can download this disc. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for your vulnerability. This is very cathartic. Thank you.